For part 2 of the dungeon rules video, let's start with one more thing from player phase. It's comical how many things I've been forgetting. Anyway, the key that in the aesthetics video you saw over there has been changed. It's now over here in that space, if I can stop shaking. And once a hero has acquired it, that's a gray key, so you can't use it to get out. You can use it to move into the cell, and once a player has moved into it, it's permanently locked. You can't, like, hide in there or anything. And inside the cell is one of many special weapons, and I've covered how you acquire them just by moving over them. I haven't covered what they do. So, anyway, this one, Staff of Life, just gives you a healing charge, which functions like the other healing charges, which I explained in the other video. I'm just gonna leave it. Sword of Dueling. I'll explain that in the fight phase. Helmet of Protection, worn by that guy, dubbed the Torture Master, will be explained later. Inside of those crates is the Crystal of Rage, which gives you 2 rage charges, which is a barbarian thing, which I'll explain in fight phase. But you can only use them if you have suffered at least 3 damage and haven't healed it. So you have to be on 5 health or less in order to use those. There is also, and I think that's the last thing, is the Bow of Accuracy over there, which gives you 2 shooting charges. But the difference is that those shooting charges, when they are spent, they're the same as normal shooting, except for on the first roll of the die, the skulls and the sword and skulls effect are swapped. So basically, shield, auto hit, damage, sword, or skull, reroll, and then sword and skull, you miss, nothing happens. And then when you roll the second roll, it's as normal, so shield, damage, sword, sword, sword and skull, damage, skull, skull, nothing happens. So, those are that. Is that the end of the player phase? Yes. That is the end of the player phase. Now, on to the monster movement phase, which is hopefully going to take less time because less goes on in it. And for some reason, I cannot place this there. Nope, never mind. I'll just have to do that later. Anyway, so for monster movement, you go by each monster and you roll a dice as if they're moving like a hero does. So you roll the dice and then they move that many spaces. If they see a hero, they will go for that hero. If they see the hero like move off somewhere, they'll still go there because, you know, exercise logic when having monsters. So for example, if you have like a monster here, then there's a hero over there, and then the hero moves 1 space, like 2 spaces that way, so he's out of line of sight. The monster won't turn off and go there because he knows there's a hero that way, so he'll keep going. I like to point a monster the way that I know that they're going to just help me know exactly which direction they are going. Monsters can't jump the lava pit. They really, they can't pull levers, they just kind of move around, and that guy functions the same. Now, the other thing for monsters is they're not controlled by any player, so how do you make decisions with them? So if, for example, if you enter, generally you should only have to do some rolling to determine where they go when they enter this room. But if they enter this tea room or that tea room from the cellar over here or the spider pit over here, you will need to randomly roll. So, when they enter a room, you look at the 2 doors close that aren't where they came from. So, if you entered the dungeon from there, you would see that door and that door. Even though this door is closer, you'd still roll randomly just because they're not going to always go for the closest thing, and otherwise they would get stuck in a kind of, I don't know, just not what I want. So, if they enter the big room, say from the dungeon, you would roll for whether they go there or there. And if there's a door in one of these places of the options, then that option is considered not an option. So if that door was closed and they exited from here, you wouldn't roll for that because they'd just only go to the red room. So where doors are closed can really change the shape of the board. And monsters won't use the secret passage unless they see a hero on the other end of it. Otherwise, they'll just act as if it wasn't there. When it's when it's open, that is. When it's closed, it isn't there. What else? I think... Oh yes, these guys. These spiders will not move. They stay still and don't move until a hero moves onto one of these two spaces. You know, they move into the room. Then they'll, you know, attack and do and act as normal monsters. So if they kill that hero, then they will move out. But otherwise, they'll just stay there and they won't move until a hero is inside of that room. And yeah, a monster will always go for the closest hero. So if they see a hero far away, but they know that there's a hero in the room closer, then they'll go for the closer hero because, well, that they can see. The closest hero they can see. And you can't, like, basically, you can't make it so that a monster keeps changing directions. They'll pick a direction and they'll go that direction. And they won't keep changing unless they know that there's something closer. So, yeah, for rolling which direction monsters go, you just use the 50-50 die and assign a direction to each face. Each color. Oh, and then one thing about monster spawning that I forgot to mention. Over here, if any monsters, if any normal little goblins, you know, not goblin guardians, spawn in this blue monster spawner, they become torturers, these little guys. And if a player is damaged by a torturer, you mark them with one of these little red dots, and for their next movement, their speed, whatever they roll, their movement is reduced by 1. So basically they're slower. They kind of, yeah, they're just slower. I think that's it for monster movement. If monsters engage a person, that's that. Oh, and if there's groups of monsters, if there's big groups of monsters, you do the ones in the back first so that they can leapfrog over as many as possible. So basically you maximize the monster movement. So when they get in big groups, they'll start moving fast, which will make it a little harder to avoid them. As players, that is. And that, I think, is all for monster movement. And if a player is engaged at the start of their turn, then they don't get to do anything. Generally, this will happen when a player moves in to fight another player. That other player that's just been moved into, they don't get a chance to, they don't take their turn. So they don't get to buy anything. They don't get to, you know, use any abilities. That's just that. Now then, on to the fight phase. Oh, right. And Goblin Guardians are considered to have 2 health, and if they take 1 damage and don't die, then use that. So, when 2 creatures are fighting, first a player rolls a die, and generally won't matter, but if for some reason 2 players are fighting, because players can fight, players are opposed, they're enemies, they're not team working, then it shouldn't matter, but if it does matter, then use the 50-50 to decide which player rolls their die first. And you roll the die, and on the roll of a skull, on the player's roll of a skull, they suffer damage equal to monster strength. Goblins are strength 1, Goblin Guardians are strength 2, the skeleton is strength 2, but he has 3 health. The Goblin General is strength 3, and he has 3 health, and the Torture Master up there is strength 3, and he has 4 health, so he's pretty tanky. And he has a shield point, which I'll explain in a second. So if you roll skull, suffer damage equal to monster strength. Sword and skull, deal 1 damage to the monster and suffer or player, and suffer damage equal to the player monster strength. Player strength is 1, by the way. Shield is you deal damage equal to the player strength plus 1, so players deal 2 damage to a monster, meaning they could automatically kill a Goblin Guardian. And sword is just deal 1 damage to the monster. And then, if the monster isn't, or other player isn't dead, then they roll a Heroica die. So, the monster rolls a Heroica die, and the same thing happens. So, skull, they take a damage from the player, or sword and skull, they deal damage equal to their strength, and player takes damage. And if they roll shield, they'll deal damage equal to the monster strength plus 1. So, kind of like battle Heroica. where, monsters are kind of like, they can do stuff as well. And then I think it's just down to what players, the other player kind of special abilities in the fighting. Oh, and strength potions. Strength potions, you can spend them before anyone rolls any die in the fighting, and no dice are rolled, and you deal 2 damage to the opponent, and that's it. If 2 players use strength potions, then their effects cancel out, and you roll as normal. So it does matter. Now then, for special abilities, let's start with the Sword of Dueling. The Prince also natively has this ability, so if the Prince or someone with Sword Dueling, either them or the monster or person they're fighting roll a sword and skull, they may change the face of the die to whatever the heck they want, except for shields. So basically, if, say the Prince rolls this, he can turn it to a sword. And say the Prince's opponent rolls this, he can turn it to a skull. If the Prince has the Sword of Dueling, first he adjusts sword and the opponent's stuff 1, and then he bumps his own up 1. So say this is the roll, and his opponent rolls this, and he rolls this. First, he adjusts his opponent's to a skull, and then he improves his result by 1 to a shield. So if you both rolled sword and skulls, he would bump his to a sword, bump yours to a skull, and then improves his because a sword and skull was rolled. Or say you rolled a sword, a monster rolled a sword and the Prince rolled this, and assuming he has the Sword of Dueling, this is all if the Prince has the Sword of Dueling, then he bumps his to a sword and then improves his to a shield. So it's pretty scary, actually. And then armor points. These are these little things. You can spend them to cancel up to 2 damage from a single roll of the dice. Not a fight, a roll of dice. So they're better against, like, strength 2 monsters, or if a player rolls a crit against, D&D terms, a shield against another player, then you can spend an armor point to cancel up to 2 damage. And finally, we have the Barbarian's Rage points. If he deals damage to an opponent during a fight, he can spend one of those rage points to increase the damage by 1. He can only spend 1 rage point per fight. If he's fighting multiple people, he can spend multiple, of course, on each of them. But he can spend it to basically do more damage. And he does this before the opponent, basically as soon as he rolls. So say he's fighting like a Goblin Guardian and he rolls a sword, he can spend that to do extra damage before the Goblin Guardian gets to roll, meaning he probably won't get damaged. And yeah, so the Knight has 2 armor points, Prince has 1, but the Prince has that nice little turn swords and skulls into better stuff abilities. And I think, oh right, the one other thing is when you kill a strength 2 monster or one of the 3 special monsters, you get a gold. So that's one way you can kind of get gold, but you don't get any gold for killing strength 1 monsters like the goblins or torturers. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is the game. No, it's not. I forgot something else. Well, forgot or didn't cover, but anyway. The one thing I forgot to mention was when players die, because players are probably going to accumulate some items over the course of their, turns and stuff. So if they have items when they die, first, so let's grab a player as an example. When a player dies, say he had, like, I don't know, just a gold, and let's just grab a special weapon. So, first, he picks the items are dropped by the player who had them. So first, you place an item in the space which you died, because you lose your items when you die. And then, you place items in the 4 spaces surrounding the place you died. And then if for some reason you have a very large amount of items, let's just say a player died here. So first you place an item there, and then you place them in these 4 spaces, and then you place them in these 4 spaces, and then you place them in these, well, you can't drop stuff upwards, these 4 spaces, and then you place them in these, like, 8 spaces. So basically you kind of make circles, and the player who died determines just where these items go. Anyway, and you can't place items in spaces where other people are. And monsters, like in Battle Heroica, if they move onto an item, they just kind of move past it. Additionally, when special weapons are dropped that have charges, all those charges regenerate. Assuming they weren't, dropped in the lava pit, in which case they're gone. But if they have charges, whenever someone dies with an item that they've spent charges on, all the charges come back as they drop it. So when items pass hands that have spent charges, then they all regenerate. And so far as the Torture Master over there, with the 1 armor point, he uses that armor point if he ever takes 2 damage or more. Otherwise, he only uses it to stop himself from dying. So if he's on 1 hit point and then he takes damage, he will use it to stop himself from dying. So he uses it as smartly as possible. And yeah, that's so when the players die, they drop their items, but if you kill a monster, then you get whatever items they have automatically. Like, for example, the key that is being held by the Yellow General down there. And that, for the millionth time, is the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching, and whenever the next video may be, I hope I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.